Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. We have a lot of really important things to talk about. I'll just dedicate a couple of minutes on the map update to kind of get you the perspective that everything is good on the front lines. First thing to cover is that here on the north side, where I was telling you for a longer time that Russians were trying to advance here to try and cut off the Sieversk defense position, by now we see that they are failing, so no major advancements is happening, and Ukrainians are reporting that they are defending it firmly. Another firm position that was kind of for a longer time considered contested was Orikhovo-Vasilievka, where supposedly Russians entered part of the settlement, and then it was unclear whether or not Russians would advance towards Minkivka over here or not. Now we know for sure that Russians were not successful and they are not controlling Orikhovo-Vasilievka. This is firmly in Ukrainian hands and the defense positions are very solid over there. Now here on the deep state map, this is the road here basically that is pretty much in contest, and it's kind of considered the hardest position in Bakhmut right now. But what we know so far that while it is colored red on this map, otherwise, it is known that actually the fighting is happening some couple hundred of meters from this road. So there is no confirmations that Russians are in control of this road. Otherwise, the situation in Bakhmut is the same. Basically, we need to know that the fact that there is no changes in the situation in Bakhmut, it just means that the Bakhmut situation is good because Ukrainians are on the defensive and they're claiming that they are holding Bakhmut firmly. So if no changes in Bakhmut, then the situation is well in control by the Ukrainian armed forces. If we scroll a little bit down to Avdiivka direction, here we actually find some nice news. Firstly, we know that Stepove, assaults by Russians towards Stepove has been stopped, and again, Ukrainians are in control. And then secondly, additional information around the southern area, where it turned out that Ukrainians are actually more in control of the positions here, and they're actually closer to this Spartak area over here than it was expected before. So Ukrainians are actually having a more forward advancing positions than Russians were expecting. So that's the situation on the map. I will cover it in more details during the week, but for now, just know that Ukrainians are well in defense. They are controlling the situations. Russians are running out of steam. Analysts are saying that Russians are having about 30 to 40,000 fresh troops that they have left. Some people are saying that they're maybe waiting until the weather is just becoming a little bit drier, so then they can utilize a lot of their vehicles and then they can attack on the various parts of the front line. But to be honest, 30, 40,000 is not that much. To put it in a perspective, that's literally like what was spent by the Russian troops when attacking for Soledar. And more importantly, it's 30, 40,000 troops that are not of the prime quality. These are not the super elite troops that were first engaged in the battles of Soledar. Those elite units are now more of a rotational basis. With this said, thank you so much for watching the map update, and we're going to go into the discussion part. I want to start by saying thanks to the people that slapped that like button last time. I've checked the analytics, and compared to the videos where I don't ask you to do it, like the views just skyrocketed. It's crazy. So it's super effective. Don't believe whenever people say that like hitting like and like writing a comment doesn't matter. It does. So thanks for that. And we're going to start by discussing the coming Ukrainian counteroffensive because that's pretty much the hottest topic there is right now. And the obvious starting point is that Ukrainian MOD has requested a media blackout. And as you know, guys, as much as I love doing the clicks and like covering topics about how hot certain things are, I always follow the Ukrainian MOD recommendations for a blackout of information. So I'm not going to be sharing any specifics about the coming counteroffensive, when it's going to start, what's the activity around it, and whatnot. However, one thing we must talk about, and that's that Zelensky in one of his recent address has talked about that there might not be any kind of a counteroffensive. And a lot of people got really worried about the fact that, well, does this mean that Ukraine is not going to have any counteroffensive? And to be fair, like there is a seed of truth of what Zelensky is saying. because the biggest kind of roadblock to a counteroffensive is the ability of Ukrainian to is the presence of resources for Ukraine. So that means if there are no resources, then there it's very hard and not impossible to conduct counteroffensive. The decision to hold Bakhmut, one of the costs of that decision is was an additional expenditure of ammunition, especially artillery ammunition, to defend Bakhmut from the coming Russian offensive. And we already know that this is a area where Ukraine has been struggling. Hence, the last Ramstein meeting was pretty much focused and centered around what kind of ammunition Ukraine need and when that ammunition can be delivered. And we also hear Poland and other countries mentioning that ammunition should be delivered to Ukraine as fast as possible. And I think this is where the message of Zelensky comes into. So I don't think it was meant for a wider audience to kind of not scare, but to make sure that we stay on our toes, the Western leaders, the Western allies, so we remember that it's not good enough to promise something, right? In a war, timing also matters, and this is a pattern that we've been seeing in the Western allies happening all over the year and whatnot, right? We've been too slow to supply actually the equipment necessary. And I think the ammunition shortages here is where Zelensky's kind of pushing for, because we know very clearly that it is the Western allies that really hoping to see that Ukraine succeeds in its counteroffensive and regains some part of the territory, makes Russian positions weaker. However, Zelensky is basically saying, well, if you want that to happen, then you need to provide us with the tools to make it happen, because right now the ammunition you're providing is not good enough. So I do not think that the message that Zelensky was trying to put forward is by saying that we're not going to have any kind of counteroffensive. I think that he wants to make sure that the Western leaders feel that the responsibility of this counteroffensive to be a great success also lies with the Western leaders. And we in West should not only open our mouths and proclaim that we're going to deliver or we're going to send vehicles and send ammunition, but also actually execute on those promises and deliver things on time. Because my understanding is that some of the deliveries that were promised have been lacking. We've heard this with tanks, and I'm pretty sure this has only also been happening with the ammunition, the delivery promises and whatnot. And then we come to the point that I really, really wanted to talk to you about, which is the fact that this war, the perspective of the war, and the outcomes of this war have completely turned on their heads. This is how I'm seeing it. We started this war, and the biggest question for us was, will Ukraine survive as a country? You know, it's like we were considering whether after 3 days, a week, a month, and so on, basically, how long will this circus continue and how long Ukraine will try to resist before ultimately collapsing to Russia. But I think the visit of Chinese leader Xi Jinping to Russia, and now Russia is becoming a vassal state of China, has twisted this picture completely, because we are not discussing the war in a sense of what's going to happen with Ukraine, as more and more discussion is happening around, well, what's actually going to happen with Russia. And Russia is becoming the object in this whole war situation. Ukraine, with every month that is passing, Ukraine is not only establishing their subject status as a people and a country that defines their own destiny, but also it becomes a bigger player that's going to define the geopolitical area and where the border between essentially like Western world are drawn on the map. And this is incredibly showing after we've seen the performance of Russians in their offensive that they did on spring. There has been multiple discussions of the people saying that the offensive that Russians did in winter was premature, that the timing was really, really poor, that the objectives were kind of like were not achieved at all. Because let's kind of count time just a little bit back, because I hear now, I see read troll comments or some dumbasses that are writing as like, oh, Georgie, like Russia is taking so much territory. I actually think that their offensive in the winter actually worked. Let's go back a couple of months. Like I know that like having an amnesia in Russian trolls is very normal. Like they don't remember a thing after it passed, and they like to just adjust to new situation. But what was happening a couple of months ago, if I will remind you, we were discussing what will happen if Russia start attacking Ukraine from the north. What will happen? Like, will Ukraine be able to hold? Will Russia attack Kyiv and maybe take and siege Kyiv? You remember these discussions, right, guys? It's not only me that completely. And then we were talking, and I was saying to you that if Russia does this, then it's going to be a complete devastation for them. And I said that potentially the most dangerous scenario for Ukraine will be if Russia takes those couple of hundreds of thousands of troops, and then they will concentrate on the Donbass front line, concentrate on Bakhmut, concentrate on Vuhledar, Avdiivka, those directions. And what we saw was basically the common sense of the Russian generals actually taking a stand and executing exactly on those points. We didn't see any kind of movements towards Kyiv. We didn't see any kind of attacks from Belarus. We didn't see any kind of attacks around Kharkiv. We seen the deliberate activity of trying to push around the area of Bakhmut, around the area of Avdiivka, and so on. So Russia actually took all of these hundreds of thousands of troops that they prepared, and they did strategically the most logical and the most significant kind of and the most threatening impact that Ukraine could have had, because their goal at that moment would be to say, okay, we're going to focus on a narrow part of the battlefront, and we're going to try to maybe take Donbass. And I said that chances of them taking Donbass are quite slim. But this discussion was still around, okay, will they take Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, or will they not take Sloviansk, Kramatorsk? Right? We were not considering that if they select this dangerous option, if Bakhmut will stand, if Avdiivka will stand, if Vuhledar will stand. Like, people were considering and saying, is like, that's a lot of force. That's a lot of like vehicles. That's a lot of manpower that Russia has available. It is not clear if Ukraine will be able to hold Donbass. So I want us to kind of snap out of the amnesia factor and realize just like how shit Russian army is and how poorly they are performing, because we have seen that they tried to do the most sensible thing in a strategic way, and they failed. They failed so incredibly hard. Then even comparing this discussion of like, well, maybe Russia will go from the north to take Kyiv right now is more of a considered as a joke, and all of the trolls, they're pretending that it never happened. And this is where the subjectivity of Russia is starting to fold into itself, because inability of their army to execute and do anything, like having all of these older weapon systems now coming to the front lines, the T-55s, T-54s. And I know that people are saying, okay, maybe it's going to be artillery. It's not going to be artillery, guys. That was exactly the point that I made last time. That's not how Russia operates. They're going to just slap some reactive armor. They're going to put some Ivans on top of these tanks, and they will go to fight on the front lines. Russia is desperate. They do not have the resources necessary to keep sustaining this war effort. And maybe they have still a chance to do it for a year, maybe a year and a half, but they are running completely out of resources. So more and more, the discussion turns about what's not going to happen with Ukraine, because Ukraine by this point has stabilized itself as a part of the Western world. And as much as Hungary wants to deny the ascension of Ukraine into the Western sphere, Ukraine has stopped being that country that was there just on the sidelines of the Eastern Europe. Now it's one of the countries that's pretty much defining how Europe will look like in the future, because it shamed the European powers, as they were calling themselves, in the sense, in the military aspect. We've seen that a lot of the European nations that were just, peacocking their might and majority of their firepower, turned out that it might be a joke, that a lot of the nations within Europe could not be even defending themselves. And that's where Ukraine comes in. Ukraine comes in as a strong force within the Eastern Europe. And Russia, now, by becoming this vassalage, firstly, it plays well into Ukrainian work situation, because one of the big dangers that a lot of the European leaders are still pissing their pants about is that the Russia will fall apart, and that a lot of the nuclear weapons will end up in some local radical groups. With Russia becoming a vassal state of China, China is basically guaranteeing to these European powers that the nuclear arsenal of Russia will A, not be used, and B, they will be there to take care of it. Right now, there is still a discussion about Putin's regime staying in power, but I do not believe that it's going to persist. What I think is going to happen is we're going to see slowly but surely, as China is going to find people that will be able to stabilize the situation and how to slowly but surely get Putin out of his chair. The destiny of Russia is going to fade into oblivion, and we're going to see it basically become what Belarus right now is for Russia. It's basically a Russian doll of authoritarianism that we're seeing. There's like a Belarus is a puppet of Russia, whereas Russia is going to become a puppet of China. Right now, these things are still forming, so we don't see, for example, China have a direct influence on the Russia in this war. But as we're going to go along, you will see. But the point is, Russian military is incapable to achieve any kind of goals, and Chinese influence will make sure that while Russia might stay a threat to the Western allies, because China do want to use Russia's puppet state to weaken the Western powers, overall, we will see that it's just going to become a sort of a failed state, a resource adjustment, not adjustment, but like a resource sidekick for Chinese, which is great news for Ukraine, that completely solidified itself on the European stage, part of the Western world, and that is great news. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Thank you so much for all of the amazing supporters of this channel on the Patreon or on the YouTube membership. Please donate to the Ukrainian military, support the Ukrainian armed forces, because as much as we want, as much as shit the Russian military is, they can still do a lot of damage. And the only party that can stop doing them damage is the Ukrainian armed forces. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you guys next time.